Have you ever noticed such strange things around you? Some people take out online loans to buy high-end mobile phones and end up trapped in tens of thousands of yuan in debt due to compound interest. Others save frugally for several years just to buy an LV bag or hold a grand funeral. Why are the poor so obsessed with these non-essential things? The money aid to Africa is increasing year by year, but its GDP remains stagnant. Is aid really useless? I spent a long time delving into the 20-year on-the-ground poverty research results by Nobel Prize-winning economists, and finally uncovered the truth about poverty. It's never about laziness or stupidity, but about underlying logics that many people don't expect. Today, I'll take you through this empirical research on poverty and see what real poverty alleviation should look like. In the early stages of my research on poverty, the first core controversy I encountered was, is aid to the poor really effective? To be honest, at first I thought the answer was obvious. Of course it is. How could we just watch them starve to death without aid? But after going through authoritative global poverty research data, especially statistics related to sub-Saharan Africa, I realized things are far more complicated. Sub-Saharan Africa is one of the poorest regions in the world. I checked World Bank public data and found that international aid to this region has been increasing year by year, from billions of US dollars annually in the early days to tens of billions later. The investment scale has been getting larger and never stopped. Yet at the same time, when I compared Africa's GDP data for the same period, I found that these figures barely changed, as if press the pause button stuck in place. This stark contrast in data made me ponder deeply. The money was clearly spent, so why didn't the local economy improve? With this question, I began to sort out different views on this issue from the global academic and public welfare communities, and found two completely opposing voices. One view holds that the problem lies in local government governance in Africa, with corruption at its core. Materials supporting this view show that much aid money is not actually used for disaster relief or national infrastructure, but is embezzled by a small number of officials, and some even directly flows into private pockets. In this case, aid not only fails to alleviate poverty, but also becomes a breeding ground for corruption, making the problem worse. The other view attributes the cost to the poor themselves, arguing that Africans will develop a strong dependence on aid. They believe that some people already lack motivation to work, and long-term free aid will make these people even unwilling to work actively, focusing solely on waiting for external relief, forming a vicious cycle of the more you help, the lazier you get. There are even extreme views that aid to Africa should be completely stopped. Perhaps without external dependence, local people will truly become self-reliant and take the initiative to escape poverty. But in my research, I also found that voices opposing the suspension of aid are equally strong. These views argue that if aid is abruptly stopped, sub-Saharan Africa is likely to face a large-scale famine. I checked relevant historical famine data and found that this region has experienced multiple food crises. Once external aid is lost, the food gap cannot be filled, and a terrible scene of widespread death may occur. Both views have their own bases, just like when people got sick in the Middle Ages, some chose to pray to gods, while others sought medical treatment. No one could give a definite answer as to which method works. It wasn't until I came into contact with the randomized control trial method in modern medicine that I suddenly realized that a similar approach could be used to study poverty. In modern medicine, doctors divide people with similar conditions into several groups. One group receives conventional drug treatment. One group uses new drugs, and one group serves as a control without medication. By observing the recovery of different groups, they can determine which treatment method is effective. This idea gave me great inspiration. I began to understand that sitting in an office and thinking about data in the abstract can never help us understand the real causes of poverty. We must delve into the real lives of the poor, see how they live every day and what specific difficulties they face to find the key to the problem. So I focused on that 20-year on-the-ground poverty research result. The research team established a dedicated poverty laboratory and traveled to dozens of poor countries and regions around the world, from mountain villages in India to grassland tribes in Africa. They carefully recorded the living conditions, consumption habits, and difficulties faced by the poor, and finally compiled the research report Poor Economics. Much of what I share today comes from the real research data and experimental results in this report, and every conclusion is supported by solid evidence. After talking about the controversy over aid, I want to first discuss the first key to poverty alleviation: health. In the course of my research, I found that the gap between the poor and the rich is not only reflected in wealth accumulation, but the gap in health status is even more shocking, and health is precisely the basic premise for the poor to escape poverty. I sorted out public data from global health organizations. The rich have enough wealth to undergo regular physical examinations, hire personal trainers, and buy high-quality health products, so their health levels are generally high. But the poor are completely different. Not to mention fitness and health products, they can't even afford the most basic medical care. Many adults in poor families are busy making a living every day and have no time for physical examinations. Even if they feel slightly unwell, they will endure it because they are reluctant to spend money, and only seek medical help when their condition becomes so serious that they can't work. One set of data particularly disturbs me. 9 million children around the world die before the age of 5 every year. I checked the specific regional distribution and found that most of them are concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. I studied the main causes of these children's deaths in depth, and most of them are common infectious diseases such as malaria, pneumonia, and diarrhea, diseases that can actually be effectively prevented and controlled in areas with better medical conditions. I also found that health problems will directly drag the poor into a poverty cycle. If a person is in poor health, they cannot participate in productive labor normally, and naturally cannot earn money, leading to a decrease in family income. With reduced income, they have no money to improve their diet and medical conditions, so their health status further deteriorates. Finally, they fall into a vicious cycle of poor health gives inability to work, gives inability to earn money, gives deeper poverty, gives worse health, which is impossible to break free from. So in my opinion, to help the poor escape poverty, we must first solve their health problems and break this vicious cycle. When it comes to solving health problems, the first thing I focused on was vaccination. Modern medicine has developed mature vaccines for many infectious diseases, and many serious diseases that threaten children's lives can be effectively controlled through vaccination. But in my research, I found that 25 million children around the world still fail to receive vaccinations every year. These children are like being without protective clothing. Once they encounter an infectious disease epidemic, they are extremely vulnerable to infection and even death. Why, with such mature vaccine technology, are so many children still facing the dilemma of lacking vaccines? Is it due to insufficient funds, inadequate technology, or parents' lack of attention? With these questions, I focused on the vaccination case in Udaipur, India. The villages in Udaipur are scattered among towering mountains with very inconvenient transportation. The data I found showed that the vaccination coverage in this area is only 1%, and most children fail to complete all vaccinations. At first, I thought it was due to insufficient vaccine supply or limited technical level locally. But after in-depth understanding, I found that the Indian government has set up vaccination points in the area, equipped with professional nurses, and vaccines are provided for free. There are no obstacles in terms of technology and funds. I then suspected that parents do not pay attention to their children's health, but subsequent research data showed that when their children are ill, these parents are willing to spend a lot of money to take them to the hospital for treatment. So the guess that parents do not pay attention is also invalid. It wasn't until I read the interview records of local villagers that I found the core of the problem. There is a huge hidden cost of vaccination for the poor. Because the villages are scattered, vaccination points are usually set up in relatively centralized towns and townships. Villagers have to climb mountains and cross ridges, taking a whole day to reach them. What's more frustrating is that I also found that some nurses are irresponsible and often absent from work without reason. Even if villagers make the long journey to the vaccination point, they may face the situation of making a wasted trip. For the poor who make a living through physical labor, not working for a day means losing a day's income, which may cause the whole family to have no food the next day. Faced with the pressure of survival, many parents have no choice but to give up vaccinating their children. To verify this guess, the research team designed 3 groups of randomized controlled trials. and I carefully studied the entire experimental process and data results. The first group was the control group, with no intervention measures, only recording the natural vaccination situation. The second group set up mobile vaccination stations in the villages, allowing villagers to get vaccinated without long-distance travel. The third group not only set up mobile vaccination stations, but also provided small rewards for families that got vaccinated, 2 caddies of beans for the first vaccination and a set of cookware for completing all vaccinations. The experimental results were very clear. The vaccination rate of the control group was only 6%. After setting up mobile vaccination stations, the vaccination rate increased to 17%. And with the addition of the reward mechanism, the vaccination rate rose sharply to 38%. This set of data fully proves that the core reason for the low vaccination rate is not insufficient funds, backward technology, or conceptual issues, but the cumbersome vaccination process and high hidden costs. I also found that providing small rewards may seem to increase short-term costs, but in fact, it is more economical in the long run. Let me do the math. The cost of 2 caddies of beans and a set of cookware is very low, adding up to only a few US$. But through the reward mechanism, the vaccination coverage has increased significantly. The vaccination target that originally took a year to complete can be achieved in 1 month. This saves the manpower and material costs for the subsequent 11 months, making it more cost-effective overall. This finding also refutes the doubt that rewards are bribes and will increase aid costs, making me more convinced that to solve the problems of the poor, we must find the real pain points and take precise intervention measures. In addition to vaccination, malaria prevention and control is another key research direction of mine. Malaria is an infectious disease transmitted by mosquito bites. I checked WHO data and found that more than 900,000 people die from malaria every year around the world, most of whom are children under 5 in Africa. In fact, the method of preventing and controlling malaria is very simple, using insecticide-treated bed nets to separate people from mosquitoes. The unit price of such bed nets is about $10. But even such a simple and effective prevention and control tool has sparked great controversy in the promotion process. The core of the controversy is whether bed nets should be distributed for free. Some people believe that free distribution will make the poor not cherish them. They may use the bed nets for other purposes such as fishing nets or wedding dresses instead of malaria prevention and control. More importantly, free distribution will make the poor dependent, and they will no longer be willing to buy them in the future, leading to the interruption of malaria prevention and control work once aid stops. Others argue that free distribution can allow more poor families to use bed nets, quickly increase coverage, effectively cut off the transmission route of malaria, and save more lives. These two views are in a stalemate, so I decided to find the answer through research data. The research team carried out a field experiment in poor villages in Kenya, Africa, and I carefully sorted out the experimental design and results. They distributed coupons with different discount levels to villagers, and the purchase prices of bed nets corresponding to the coupons were $0 free, $1, $2, and $3 respectively. These prices are all lower than the cost price of $10, which is a government subsidy. The experimental results showed that there is a clear negative correlation between the purchase rate of bed nets and the price. When Ninshu for free, the purchase rate is close to 100%. When the price rises to $3, the purchase rate drops to about 20%. Even so, some villagers are still willing to buy them. More importantly, I saw follow-up tracking research data showing that whether villagers received bed nets for free or purchased them for $3, the usage rate reached 80%, almost no difference, and there was no case of using bed nets for other purposes. Villagers generally use the bed nets for malaria prevention and control, especially to protect their children at home. Moreover, in the second year when the research team sold bed nets again at a price of $2, the repurchase rate of villagers who received them for free in the first year was very close to that of those who purchased them for $3, and also similar to that of villagers who purchased them at $2 in the first year. This set of data completely dispelled my concerns, proving that the poor did not develop a dependence on free bed nets. Instead, after using them, they recognized the value of bed nets and got used to this healthier lifestyle. so they were willing to buy them again in the future. At the same time, I also found that the widespread use of bed nets can also produce a group protection effect, even if only some families use bed nets. It can effectively reduce the number of mosquitoes in the area, cut off the transmission route of malaria, and allow families not using bed nets to benefit indirectly. After solving the health problem, next I want to talk to you about another core driving force for poverty alleviation, education. In the course of my research on poverty, I found that the education gap is one of the most significant gaps between the poor and the rich, and it is even the key for the poor to achieve class mobility. I sorted out economic data from many countries around the world and found an astonishing law. If the average years of schooling in a country increases by 1 year, its GDP can grow by more than 30%. This data fully illustrates the huge driving role of education in economic development and poverty alleviation and prosperity. I also found that education can form two completely different cycles. People with a good education are more likely to get high-paying jobs, accumulate wealth, and then provide better educational resources for the next generation. Forming a positive feedback cycle of good education gives high income gives better education for the next generation, while the poor who lack education due to limited employment opportunities and low income levels find it difficult to provide quality education for their children, and can only fall into intergenerational transmission of poverty, making it difficult for generations to escape poverty. So in my opinion, to help the poor escape poverty, we must attach great importance to education, and not only stay at the level of letting children go to school, but also take into account both extending education time and improving education quality. Only in this way can we truly give play to the role of education in poverty alleviation. However, in many developing countries, the popularization of education faces severe challenges, and India is a typical example. I checked India's education statistics and found that many children from poor families drop out of school early and cannot complete basic compulsory education. These children enter the society to work at an early age, engaging in low-income physical labor, and it is difficult for them to escape poverty for a lifetime. What exactly is the reason for children dropping out of school? With this question, I delved into the relevant experiments carried out by the research team in India. The research team proposed 4 possible intervention methods, hoping to calculate the input-output ratio of each method through comparative experiments. The core measurement indicator is how many years of education can be increased with $100. I carefully studied the experimental process and results of these 4 methods. The first is to hire more teachers to solve the shortage of rural school teachers. The experimental results showed that $100 can only increase 1.7 years of education. The second is to provide free lunches to attract poor families to send their children to school. This method is more effective, with $100 increasing 2.8 years of education. The third is to deworm children, because many rural children are infected with parasites such as roundworms, leading to weakness, frequent illness, and inability to attend classes normally. Unexpectedly, this method has an extremely significant effect, with $100 increasing 28.6 years of education. The fourth is to educate parents and change their cognitive attitudes towards studying. This is the most effective method, with $100 increasing 40 years of education. This set of experimental data gave me great inspiration and made me have a deeper understanding of the education problems of poor families. Why is the effect of deworming so good? I checked relevant medical data and found that parasites such as roundworms absorb nutrients from children's bodies, leading to malnutrition, fatigue, inattention, and other problems in children. These problems directly affect children's attendance and learning efficiency, and the cost of deworming is extremely low. A bottle of deworming medicine costs less than $1, but it can effectively improve children's health and allow them to have the energy to stay in class. So for poor families, deworming is a cost-effective educational intervention measure. The reason why educating parents is the most effective is that I found that many poor parents have serious cognitive biases towards studying. Through the analysis of interview records with local parents, I learned that most of these parents regard studying as buying lottery tickets. They think that whether their children can succeed in studying and make money is uncertain. Instead of spending time and energy letting all children study, it is better to concentrate resources on cultivating one or two promising children, while other children drop out of school early to earn money to support the family. This view is very common in poor families and is also one of the important reasons for children dropping out of school early. In response to this view, the research team took a variety of guiding measures, which I think are very worthy of learning from. On the one hand, they used real data to tell parents that studying is not a speculative behavior but a stable investment. Research data shows that on average, studying for one more year can increase future wage income by 8%. And the higher the education level, the greater the growth rate of income. On the other hand, they conveyed the concept that studying is the right and obligation of children to parents, making them realize that children are not their parents' money-making tools but independent individuals. Parents have the responsibility to provide education for their children and let them have a better life. At the same time, the research team also suggested that local governments clearly specify educational requirements in the recruitment process, so that parents can truly see that studying can lead to better jobs, thereby taking the initiative to send their children to school. These measures work together to effectively change parents' attitudes and allow more children to stay in class. In my research, I also found that increasing the time of education is only the first step. Improving the quality of education is equally crucial. If children only waste time in class and do not really learn knowledge and skills, then extending the years of education cannot achieve the goal of poverty alleviation. Through research data, I found that the quality of education in Indian public schools is generally poor, mainly with two prominent problems. First, the serious phenomenon of teacher absenteeism. Second, the widespread reading difficulties among students. An excused absence of teachers in Indian public schools is a very common phenomenon. I checked relevant research data and found that the teacher absenteeism rate in some areas even exceeds 20%. Many teachers are absent during class hours, leaving students unattended and untaught in the classroom, who can only stare in a daze or fool around and cannot learn knowledge at all. Teachers are the core of education, and teacher absenteeism directly leads to the failure of normal teaching activities. So the quality of education is naturally out of the question. In response to this problem, the research team suggested installing attendance checking systems in schools, using face recognition or fingerprint recognition to strictly manage teachers' attendance and ensure that teachers stay in the classroom. I think this suggestion is very practical. Only when teachers stick to their posts can we lay the foundation for improving the quality of education. Another prominent problem is students' reading difficulties. India's official language is English, and many textbooks and reading materials are written in English, but many children in rural areas do not know English at all and even lack basic reading skills. I saw a shocking set of data. In rural Indian schools, many fifth-grade students cannot even read first-grade English reading materials. This is not because the children are low in IQ, but because they lack basic English reading training. Previously, many public welfare organizations donated a large number of textbooks and reading materials to rural schools, but due to the serious reading difficulties of students, these books could not play any role and students' scores did not improve at all. To solve this problem, the research team organized a group of volunteers to provide free reading tutoring for rural children, specifically teaching them English and improving their reading skills. I tracked and studied the effect data after tutoring and found that after a period of targeted tutoring, students' reading levels improved significantly, and their scores in other subjects such as mathematics and science also made leaps and bounds. This experimental result made me understand that improving the quality of education cannot only rely on donating materials, but also provide precise help according to students' actual needs. For students with language barriers and insufficient reading skills, the most effective way is to provide targeted tutoring, not to blindly donate books. After talking about health and education, I want to discuss with you in depth the core crux of the poverty problem, the poverty trap. In the course of my research on poverty, I found that the most essential difference between the poor and the rich is not only the amount of wealth accumulation, but also the mode of wealth accumulation. The S-shaped curve of wealth accumulation proposed by Duflo in Poor Economics has given me a clear understanding of the formation, Logic of the poverty trap. Combining my own research, I have made an in-depth interpretation of this curve. The horizontal axis of this curve represents wealth today. The vertical axis represents wealth tomorrow, and each point on the curve reflects the relationship between current wealth and future wealth. If a diagonal line is drawn through the origin, this line represents that wealth today is equal to wealth tomorrow. People on this line will have a stable wealth level, neither getting richer nor poorer. But the actual wealth accumulation curve is not like this. Each shows an obvious S shape. I found that when a person's wealth reaches a certain level, the curve slopes upward, which means that the more wealth today, the faster the wealth will grow tomorrow. When the wealth level is below a certain threshold, the curve slopes downward, meaning that the less wealth today, the less wealth will be tomorrow. This S-shaped curve profoundly reveals the formation logic of the poverty trap. The wealth level of the rich is on the right side of the curve, exceeding the threshold of wealth growth. They can continuously increase their income through the snowball effect of wealth, and finally reach affluent equilibrium. While the wealth level of the poor is on the left side of the curve, below the threshold of wealth growth. They not only cannot achieve wealth accumulation, but also easily fall into a vicious cycle of less wealth today than tomorrow, and finally fall into poverty equilibrium, unable to extricate themselves. For the rich, they have enough funds for expanded reproduction. I have studied many cases of wealth accumulation of the rich and found that their wealth growth models are very similar. Businessmen can invest in new projects, expand business scale, and obtain more profits. Farmers can buy more land and farm tools, adopt more advanced planting technologies, and increase food production and income. Investors can achieve the preservation and appreciation of wealth through diversified investment portfolios. These investment behaviors can bring more income and make wealth grow continuously. At the same time, I also found that the rich have a strong ability to resist risks. They can cope with sudden events such as diseases, accidents, and market fluctuations by buying health insurance, property insurance, etc., to avoid a sharp shrinkage of wealth due to unexpected events. For example, even if a wealthy businessman is hospitalized due to illness, he has enough funds to pay for high medical expenses and will not fall into a financial crisis because of an illness. And when his enterprise encounters market fluctuations, he can also tide over the difficulties with sufficient cash flow. Therefore, the wealth of the rich will continue to accumulate in the cycle of investment gives increasing income, gives reinvestment, and finally reach affluent equilibrium, stabilizing at a high wealth level. The situation of the poor is completely different. I checked the income and expenditure data of many poor families and found that their wealth can only meet the most basic living needs, and many families can't even guarantee food and clothing. So they have no extra funds for expanded reproduction. For the poor, almost all daily income is used to buy necessities such as food and drinking water. After a meal, there is little money left, making it impossible to save even basically, let alone make any form of investment. I have seen a case of a poor African farmer whose annual harvest is only enough to barely feed his family. He has no surplus grain to sell, nor funds to buy improved seeds, chemical fertilizers, and other agricultural production materials. Therefore, he can only maintain an extensive planting model, and the harvest can never be improved. His income has been at a low level for a long time, making it impossible to achieve wealth accumulation. What's worse, I found that the lives of the poor are full of various risks, and they lack the ability and means to cope with risks. Any sudden event such as illness, natural disaster, or accident may make their already meager wealth vanish in an instant and even put them in heavy debt. I checked the debt data of poor families in sub-Saharan Africa and found that many families' debts come from the medical treatment of family members. If the main labor force of a poor family falls ill, they not only cannot go out to work to earn money, but also need to spend a lot of money on treatment. They have no savings, so they can only borrow money from loan sharks, and finally fall into a cycle of treating illness gives getting into debt gives repaying debt gives deeper poverty. I have also seen research data from poor villages in India that many families have lost their ability to work due to family members being infected with parasites, malaria, and other diseases, unable to obtain income, and can only sink deeper and deeper into the mire of poverty. The poor's lack of insurance awareness and ability is also an important reason why they cannot get out of the poverty trap. For the rich, buying insurance is a common way to cope with risks. They are willing to take out a portion of their wealth to buy health insurance, property insurance, etc., to ensure the stability of their future lives. But for the poor, they are busy making a living every day and have no extra money to buy insurance. They also lack a correct understanding of insurance, thinking that insurance is for the rich. In my research, I found that many villagers in poor areas do not even know what insurance is, let alone understand its role. Therefore, when risks come, the poor have no buffer and can only bear all losses alone. These losses are often unbearable for them. Once encountered, they will directly fall into the abyss of the poverty trap. I also found a very common phenomenon. Many poor people have accumulated a certain amount of wealth, only one step away from the threshold of wealth growth. But a sudden illness or accident makes their wealth shrink sharply and they fall back into poverty. I have seen a case of a poor Indian farmer who saved a sum of money through years of hard work and planned to buy an ox for plowing to improve agricultural production efficiency. With an ox, he could expand the planting area and significantly increase the harvest, and originally had the hope of crossing the threshold of wealth growth. But just as he was about to buy the ox, his child suddenly fell seriously ill. To treat the child, he not only spent all his savings, but also borrowed money from relatives and friends. In the end, he not only failed to buy the ox, but also got into debt and could only continue the original planting model, unable to achieve wealth growth. This cycle of approaching poverty alleviation gives encountering risks gives. Falling back into poverty is extremely common in poor areas and is also an important reason why the poverty trap is difficult to break. In studying the consumption behavior of poor families, I found a very interesting phenomenon, which completely changed my inherent perception of the poor. For a long time, many people have believed that the reason why the poor are poor is because they are lazy, lack IQ, or lack rich people's thinking and do not know how to save and invest. But through a lot of on-the-ground research data, I found that this is not the case. The use of money by the poor does have obvious characteristics. They are more inclined to use limited funds for non-productive expenditures rather than saving or expanding production. But this is not due to laziness or IQ, but jointly determined by various factors such as their living environment and psychological state. In my research in poor areas, I have seen many such cases. In some poor villages in India, many children from poor families are malnourished and thin, but almost every household has a TV. In poor areas in Africa, many families spend more than 40% of their annual income on holding grand funerals, even if it means borrowing money from loan sharks. Some poor people save frugally to buy high-end mobile phones, LV bags, and other luxury goods. And some even take out online loans to buy Apple mobile phones, eventually falling into a debt crisis due to compound interest. These seemingly irrational consumption behaviors imply the real demands and deep psychology of the poor for life, which are worthy of in-depth interpretation. I believe that the primary reason why the poor tend to use money for non-productive expenditures such as buying TVs, luxury goods, and holding grand funerals is that their lives are extremely boring and lack hope. I studied the daily living conditions of the poor and found that they are busy making a living every day, engaging in repetitive and arduous physical labor. They work long hours with high labor intensity but only get meager income. Except for working, they have almost no entertainment activities. Life is a daily struggle, lacking fun and a sense of accomplishment. Therefore, when they have a little savings, they hope to alleviate the boredom of life through consumption and gain. For the poor, a TV is the cheapest and most accessible form of entertainment. In the interview records, I saw a poor villager say, "A TV is more important than food." This sentence seems unreasonable, but it reflects their real psychology. Food can only solve the problem of survival, while a TV can bring spiritual comfort. By watching TV programs, they can understand the outside world and temporarily forget the hardships of life. After a hard day's work, relaxing by watching TV is one of their few spiritual sustenances. Buying luxury goods and holding grand funerals are more about gaining the attention and respect of others. For a long time, the poor have been in a weak position in society, lacking the right to speak and respect. Through these consumption behaviors, they can feel their own value to a certain extent and make up for the sense of loss in life. For example, in some poor villages in Africa, the grandeur of a funeral is regarded as a symbol of family status and filial piety. If a family does not hold a grand funeral, they will be looked down upon by relatives and friends and cannot hold their heads high in the village. Therefore, even if the family is in financial difficulty, many poor people are willing to spend a lot of money on funerals to maintain their social status. Another important reason is that the poor lack patience and confidence, making it difficult for them to overcome short-term desires and engage in long-term savings and investment. I understand that to escape poverty, the poor need to use limited funds for saving or expanding production, such as buying production materials or learning skills. But this requires them to restrain their consumption desires for a long time, give up immediate happiness, and pursue future returns. However, long-term poverty makes the poor lack confidence in the future. They do not believe that they can escape poverty through saving and investment, nor do they believe that life in the future will be better than it is now. This learned helplessness makes them more inclined to enjoy the present rather than invest in an uncertain future. I have done a simple comparison. If you say to the rich, if your assets increase by 1% every day, you will become richer in the long run, they will definitely be very willing to accept it. Because their asset base is large, a 1% daily increase means a huge increase in wealth, which can make their lives better. But if you say the same thing to the poor, most of them will dismiss it, because their asset base is too small. A 1% daily increase in income is negligible and cannot solve the immediate problem of survival. This gap in confidence makes the poor and the rich make completely different choices in the use of money. My research found that the poor face various survival risks every day, which may be an illness, a natural disaster, or unemployment. These risks may make their already meager wealth vanish in an instant. Therefore, for the poor, seizing the day and enjoying the moment is to a certain extent a rational choice rather than saving money that may be lost due to an accident. It is better to spend it now to gain immediate satisfaction. I have seen a case of a poor migrant worker who worries every day whether he can find a job next year and whether he will get sick. Therefore, he is more willing to send the money he earns hard to his family to improve their lives, or buy something he likes for himself, rather than saving it. Finally, I want to summarize the core idea of solving the poverty problem for everyone: precise policy implementation. In studying the global cause of anti-poverty, I found that the core controversy has never been whether we should aid the poor, but how to aid the poor. For a long time, due to the lack of in-depth understanding of the nature of poverty, many aid policies have often been superficial, either blindly investing a lot of money with little effect, or daring not to take effective measures for fear of creating dependence, and finally failing to truly help the poor escape poverty. And that 20-year on-the-ground poverty research result has provided scientific ideas and methods for precise aid. The key to aid is to meet the actual needs of the poor, find efficient and low-cost intervention measures through on-the-ground research and randomized controlled trials, and avoid subjective assumptions and blind investment. In my opinion, the core of precise policy implementation is identifying the crux of the problem. To identify the crux, we must delve into the lives of the poor and understand their real difficulties. Just like the vaccination problem I studied earlier, the traditional view holds that the low vaccination rate among the poor is due to insufficient funds, backward technology, or conceptual issues. But on-the-ground research found that the core of the problem is high vaccination costs. The scattered villages lead to long distances, and teacher absenteeism leads to increased hidden costs. Therefore, the policy of setting up mobile vaccination stations plus providing small rewards is not simply giving away vaccines for free, but specifically solving the pain points of long distances and high hidden costs, and finally greatly improving the vaccination coverage. The success of this policy lies in the fact that it fits the actual living conditions of the poor and does not take for granted that free can solve all problems. In terms of educational aid, precise policy implementation is equally crucial. The reasons for children dropping out of school in poor areas of India are various, including health problems, parents' attitudes, and teaching quality. If we only adopt the traditional method of building schools and donating materials, we cannot solve the fundamental problem. The measures proposed by the research team, such as deworming, educating parents, installing attendance checking systems, and providing reading tutoring, are all put forward for specific problems, and each has been verified through randomized controlled trials to ensure effectiveness and efficiency. For example, deworming has extremely low cost but can significantly improve children's attendance. Educating parents does not require a lot of capital investment, but can greatly increase the years of education for children. This kind of targeted solution to specific problems. Aid method is far more effective than blindly building schools and donating materials. I also found that precise policy implementation needs to speak with data and avoid subjective assumptions and empiricism. Traditional aid policies are often based on taken-for-granted judgments, such as the poor need free materials and the poor lack educational resources, so we should donate books. But these policies often fail to consider the actual needs and usage scenarios of the poor and, finally, have poor effects. The randomized controlled trial method adopted in that poverty research emphasizes verifying the effectiveness of policies through data collection, providing a scientific basis for policy making. For example, when testing the effects of different educational intervention measures, using how many years of education can be increased with $100 as an indicator. Through data comparison, it is clearly seen that educating parents and deworming have the best effects, thus providing a clear direction for policy making. This kind of evidence-driven aid method can avoid blind investment, improve the efficiency of aid funds, and make every penny count. At the same time, precise policy implementation also needs to respect the independent choices of the poor and avoid a one-size-fits-all aid model. The poor are not passive recipients of aid. They have the most authentic feelings about their own lives and know what they need most. In the Kenya bed net experiment, the research team did not force the poor to must buy bed nets, but distributed coupons with different discount levels, allowing them to choose whether to buy according to their actual situation. This method respects the independent choice of the poor and makes the aid policy more in line with their purchasing power and needs. The experimental results showed that even if they need to spend $3 to buy bed nets, 20% of the poor are still willing to buy them, which shows that they recognize the value of bed nets but only lack sufficient funds. Therefore, the core of the aid policy is to lower the threshold rather than force giving. Only when the poor can make choices according to their own needs and abilities can the effectiveness and sustainability of the aid be ensured. I also noticed that precise policy implementation needs to consider the cost-benefit ratio to ensure the efficient use of aid funds. Global aid funds are limited, and how to help more people with limited funds is an important issue facing the cause of anti-poverty. Through my research, I found that many aid methods that seem high cost actually have better long-term benefits, while some methods that seem low cost may have poor effects. For example, providing small rewards for vaccination, although increasing short-term costs, can greatly improve coverage and save subsequent medical and manpower costs, making it more economical in the long run. Educating parents, although requiring a certain amount of manpower for publicity and guidance, can greatly increase the years of education for children and bring long-term economic returns. Therefore, precise aid policies must not only be effective but also efficient, able to achieve the maximum effect at the lowest cost. In studying China's anti-poverty costs, I found that precise policy implementation is also the core idea. China's poverty alleviation work is not simply giving money and materials, but adopts a precise assistance method of one household, one policy according to the specific conditions of different poor areas and poor families. For example, for families living in poverty due to illness, medical security and serious illness relief are provided. For families living in poverty due to education, education subsidies and student loans are provided. For families with labor capacity, skill training and employment opportunities are provided. This precise assistance method fits the actual needs of poor families and ensures the effectiveness and sustainability of poverty alleviation. At the same time, China's poverty alleviation work also focuses on data support. By establishing a database of the poor population, real-time tracking of the situation of poor families, and timely adjusting assistance measures to ensure that every policy can be accurately implemented. After such a long period of research, I have a deep understanding that poverty is not a fate, but a state that can be changed through precise and effective aid policies. The value of that 20-year on-the-ground poverty research lies in the fact that it abandons traditional empiricism and subjective assumptions, down-to-earth delves into the lives of the poor, and uses scientific methods to find the path to poverty alleviation. We need both researchers who look up at the stars and practitioners who keep their feet on the ground. Only in this way can we truly help the poor escape poverty and break the intergenerational transmission of poverty. I hope today's sharing can make you have a deeper understanding of poverty, and I also hope that we can all understand the situation of the poor and help them in the correct way, rather than blaming or misunderstanding them. Solving the poverty problem requires the joint efforts of the whole society. I believe that as long as we identify the problems and implement precise policies, we will surely help more poor people escape poverty and live a better life.